event has become a platform for sharing the experience, discussing challenges, and suggesting new initiatives. During the very first sustainable finance workshop here in Tbilisi, the idea of developing a sustainable finance roadmap was born. The roadmap for sustainable finance in Georgia was eventually launched at the SBFN Global Meeting in Washington, D.C. in April of 2019, and it has become a milestone in the development of Georgia's sustainable finance framework. The roadmap I'm talking about combines all the steps that the National Bank of Georgia plans to take till the end of 2022. As of today, a significant share of actions listed in the roadmap is completed, while the rest of them are in the development phase. As a result of the progress that has been made in the last few years, the National Bank of Georgia further advanced in SBFN's 6-step progression matrix and now stands at the advancing stage. For the successful implementation of the action plan provided in the roadmap, the National Bank of Georgia has been closely collaborating with AFC and SBFN. After the fruitful cooperation since 2018, the National Bank of Georgia has signed a second cooperation agreement with the AFC this year. National Bank of Georgia has been working with AFC SBFN on increasing awareness and capacity building, integrating ESG considerations into risk assessment frameworks and decision-making processes of financial institutions, supporting market transparency. We have been also actively sharing our experience with other SBFN members. While the National Bank of Georgia has greatly benefited from all the help it has received from SBFN and AFC, the scope of the new agreement is even broader and includes more comprehensive actions for the next 2 years. National Bank of Georgia leverages AFC's experience while working on new projects. Currently, we are actively developing sustainable finance taxonomy, which aims to provide the market with a homogeneous definition of green, social, and sustainable economic activities. The new cooperation agreement I mentioned earlier with AFC also includes activities that enhance ESG risk management among financial institutions via developing ESG risk management guidelines. While concentrating on new tasks, the National Bank of Georgia continues collaboration with AFC on awareness-raising events and capacity building. Today's event is a good example of that. This is a great opportunity to bring together AFC experts, representatives from SBFN member countries and regional central banks, the representatives of different ministries, the senior leadership of financial institutions, and other stakeholders. It creates an opportunity to discuss sustainable finance development from different perspectives, share our experiences and the challenges that we have come across on the way. We have greatly benefited from AFC's expertise and experience sharing events. To be helpful to other SBFN members, the National Bank of Georgia has been participating in knowledge sharing sessions where we shared our experience with those who are developing their own national sustainable finance frameworks. We are happy to learn from others and to provide guidance to those who are now taking the steps that we have already implemented towards the development of sustainable finance. With this welcoming speech, I want to wish you a successful and fruitful discussion. And at the same time, I want to wish that the same event next year will be already held in Tbilisi. I very much hope that circumstances by the time will allow us to meet again and have even more lively discussions than we will have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Koban. Next, we will hear from Ms. Ivana Fernandez Duarte, who is a regional manager for the South Caucasus at IFC. Ms. Ivana, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to start agreeing with Kobe, and I really hope that next year we can meet in person. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. You already have learned that, who hasn't met me yet, that I'm the new regional manager of the South Caucasus at IFC, and I'm very happy to be here today with you. I have recently moved to this very beautiful country, and I'm delighted to participate today at the Sustainable Finance Forum, where we can share our experiences and opinions about the reforms and other activities that can make countries' financial systems more sustainable and greener. Let me start thanking Mr. Koba Gvenetadze and the Georgia's National Bank for hosting this forum together with the IFC, and the IFC supported Sustainable Banking and Finance Network. I would also very much like to thank our donor partner, the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, SECO, for joining our efforts and supporting our environmental, social, and governance advisory program. And a very warm welcome also to all our honorary guests from various countries across this region and beyond. From the IFC perspective, sustainability is indeed critical to business success, and the current ongoing COVID-19 crisis made this even more obvious and important to focus on. Now we feel it's the right time to accelerate sustainable green investments and focus on economic recovery and building back better. The green and sustainable investments go beyond concern only about the climate, because the environmental, social, and governance risks have adverse effects and impacts on economic growth globally. Given that countries have, or majority of the countries have diminished fiscal space, the private sector has to play even a major role today in this investment area. However, there is an issue of the lack of bankable projects across emerging markets, which is a real challenge, and we see that the solution lies in significantly expanding the pipeline of the sustainable investment opportunities. This is why, under the new World Bank Group Climate Change Action Plan, IFC is very much intensifying its efforts in this area. In our last fiscal year, 2021, which closed in June 2021, we delivered a record $4 billion in climate finance, accounting for 32% of our own account financing, while mobilizing additional $3.6 billion. This means that for every dollar that we spent on our own account, we mobilized 92 cents from other investors. The financial institutions as capital providers are ideally placed to help the private sector adapt to new economic realities. We estimate that financial institutions must grow the share of green climate-friendly projects in their portfolio from approximately 7% in 2016 to 30% by 2030, so more than quadrupling these. At IFC, we work together with our partners to open up opportunities for economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable private investment. Among our various efforts, we help to establish local markets by issuing local currency bonds, and also helping banks issue their own green bonds. We have been playing a leading role in the development of the Sustainable Banking and Finance Network, as the Secretariat and the knowledge partner of the network. Our colleague, Rong Zhang, the global coordinator of the network, will present today to you the key findings of the Sustainable Banking and Finance Network's Global Progress Report, which has just been issued this month. Let me also say a few words about Georgia and showcasing a bit of an example of our joint efforts here in this country. IFC has been helping Georgia's private sector to improve corporate governance standards already since 2003. Building on this work, we continued our cooperation with the National Bank to enhance the ESG standards. And since joining the IFC, supported Sustainable Banking and Finance Network in 2017, the National Bank of Georgia has shown visible progress. It has managed to develop a roadmap for sustainable finance, launched also the ESG reporting and disclosure principles, and also integrated the ESG considerations into the corporate governance code for commercial banks, and currently is in the process of developing the sustainable finance taxonomy. This might be a bit dry language to the outside world, but let's take a step back and think about what it means. In practical terms, this will provide banks with very clear guidance on how to finance the clients' green projects, their reduction of energy projects, and also reduced water usage in agricultural processes, or social projects like promotion of the use of internet in low-income communities. National Bank of Georgia, our partner, is also very active in knowledge sharing across the region and beyond, and serving as a motivator for other countries. This work in Georgia is part of our wider IFC support for Georgia. Since we opened up in the mid-1990s, we have been committed to supporting the country in dealing with the challenges ongoing and looking ahead. We looked at various opportunities to support the private sector, and we see still a great potential and remain very much committed to our strong program here. Today's forum aims to help the participants focus on the new business opportunities in Georgia and also other countries in the region. I very much hope that the financial regulators, the Sustainable Banking and Finance Network, and the IFC can support you along the way and helping to ensure a very much greener and sustainable future for all of us. Let me also conclude with a good positive news, and wanted to also issue a warm welcome to the Central Bank of Armenia, who became a member of the Central Sustainable Banking and Finance Network today. Welcome. I wish success to each of the participants today's gathering and also to all of us. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Ivana. Now I would like to invite for opening remarks Ms. Danielle Mevly, who is a Regional Director at Swiss Cooperation Office for the South Caucasus in Embassy of Switzerland in Georgia. Ms. Mevly, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and a warm welcome to all participants. Switzerland's international cooperation is strongly aligned with the SDGs agenda and with Georgia's priorities to reach inclusive and sustainable economic growth. We are about to launch a new 4-year cooperation program for the period 2022-2025 to support the efforts of the Georgian government and of other national partners in this respect. The Swiss government, through its State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, SECO, has long been supporting the adoption of international best practices in the area of sustainable finance. This is why we support the efforts of the International Finance Corporation in Georgia, in particular with respect to the implementation of a robust ESG agenda. It is remarkable that the National Bank of Georgia has joined the IFC-sponsored Sustainable Banking Network in 2017 already. And I'm very happy to hear that the National Bank of Armenia also made this step. Since the National Bank of Georgia joined, significant steps were undertaken. In 2018, the National Bank of Georgia adopted a corporate governance code for commercial banks, a code that addresses ESG indicators and ESG risk management guidance. This will improve protection and transparency, reduce risks, and attract investors. It will also contribute to the implementation by the National Bank of Georgia of its National Sustainable Finance Roadmap and its action plan. And with a bit of time, as capital markets are developed, a robust ESG component will be a critical argument to attract investors to Georgia and to fully reap the benefits of sustainable finance for development. I would like to thank the National Bank of Georgia for having taken the lead in these areas, and I take the opportunity to thank in particular Governor Koba Gwenetadze for spearheading the effort. Naturally, I am also grateful for the IFC, who is the implementer of the Swiss Finance Project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Mevly. More and more countries are developing sustainable finance frameworks. The number of green and sustainable bonds issued in emerging markets is continuously increasing. SBFN Global Progress Report provides a very interesting insight into the policy innovations and market actions across 43 emerging markets. Ms. Rong Zhang, who is a global coordinator of IFC-supported Sustainable Banking and Finance Network, will be sharing with us the key findings of the report. Ms. Rong, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mariam. And Governor Koba and Ivana and Ms. Mevly, SBFN members, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining this event from all over the world. It's a great honor to partner with NBG for the Sustainable Finance Forum for the third year, and also really appreciate SECO's continued support. So building on the three very inspiring speeches, it's my pleasure to present the key findings from the third SBFN Global Progress Report, which was launched recently. And also I would like to congratulate NBG to launch the first SBFN country report today. And other 30+ country reports will be launched in the next few weeks. And also I want to join Ivana to welcome the Central Bank of Armenia to join SBFN today. And in the month of November alone, we have 5 new members joining SBFN. So, okay, next slide, please. So this is the SBFN membership map. And it is, again, Ivana mentioned, is a global knowledge and capacity building network focused on emerging market, regulator, and industry associations who are committed to advancing sustainable finance agenda. IFC acts as the Secretariat to the SBFN, playing the role of strategic and a technical advisor, as well as global convener. SBFN members currently represent 45 countries and 68 institutions, both public and private, from industry association and regulators, representing 86% banking assets in emerging market, and 33 countries launched over 200 policies and principles. Next slide, please. The SBFN Global Progress Report is a comprehensive benchmarking of national approaches to advance small finance emerging market. The underlying analysis applies a measurement framework that has been developed by SBFN members themselves and its 4 members. This is the third report. The first of such report was issued 2018 and the second in 2019. And the global report is accomplished by a large number of individual country progress reports, like I mentioned, and the Georgia Central Bank of Georgia launched the first country report today. And the objective of the report are first to review the progress in a structured way, benchmarking against the fellow members. Second is learn from successful approaches taken by their peers in other countries. And third identifying the next best initiative in their country's sustainable finance journey. Next slide, please. The working group, the measurement working group, was established in 2016 as a response to members' demand for a systematic approach to benchmarking progress. And the working group developed and refined the measurement framework that was approved by all members and continued to evolve. The working group members providing leadership to the biennial SBM Global and Country Progress Report. The current working group represents 22 countries. You can see the logo on the side, and co-chaired by the Moroccan Capital Market Authority and Mongolia Sustainable Finance Association, and also the Financial Superintendents of Colombia. Next slide, please. This is a 5-step data collection progress. I will not go to detail, but the slides we will share with all of you. The members provide their own data, and through a series of verification of data and capture all the progress, but also looking at the trends and the plans going forward. Next slide, please. The measurement framework consists of 3 complementary components. First is the progress matrix on the top of the slide. It provides an overview of market-wide progress for all SBFN countries across 3 typical stages of development for sustainable finance framework: preparation, implementation, and maturing. And for each stage, there are 2 sub-stages. The progression matrix draws on SBFN members' common development milestones. The second component is on my left corner, is pillar benchmarking. Assessment is conducted across all 3 thematic pillars: ESG integration, climate risk management, and the financing sensibility, the opportunity side of sustainable finance. And the benchmarking uses a qualitative and quantitative data points to assess progress and allow comparison across all the countries. The 3 pillars, 3 cross-cutting sub-pillars, 11 cross-cutting indicators, and 75 underlying data points are used to objectively assess a country's sustainable finance frameworks according to clarity, comprehensiveness, and alignment to international good practice. The third component is on the right corner, is the sector data and case studies. Aggregated sector data and case studies illustrate the interaction between the national frameworks and the behavior change by financial institutions. And case studies were collected through the interviews with over 40 countries. The full collection of case studies will be published separately as a knowledge tool soon. Next slide, please. There are 4 key findings. The first key finding is that the members are accelerating the development of sustainable finance frameworks catalyzed by public and private collaboration. You can see the numbers and the acceleration trend clearly on the slide. I will not go to detail, but it's worth noting that even though all countries are severely impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, members didn't slow down their efforts and have leveraged the sustainability-focused finance as part of their recovering plans and build back better. The second key finding is that member countries are consolidating and deepening policy and market actions across all 3 thematic pillars. The highlights are, on the ESG integration pillar, 32 countries have launched a framework that set expectations for the management of ESG risk and performance by financial institutions. 15 countries have established systematic ESG data collection to track implementation. This is very, very important on the data collection and showing the trend and the actual impact on the ground. On the second pillar, climate risk management, 28 member countries are leveraging the existing ESG risk management framework to address the financial sector's exposure to both physical and the transition risk from the climate change, with 4 countries leading the way with robust policy actions. On the financing sensibility pillar, on the opportunity side of sustainable finance, 24 countries have launched guidelines for green, social, and also sustainability-focused financial instrument. 6 countries have published detailed taxonomies, and worth noting there are 16 countries in the SBFN community are in the process developing the taxonomies. Next slide, please. The third key finding is that all members are making progress along the milestones of the progression matrix, which I mentioned. There are 3 development stages and 6 substages. I mentioned that the progression matrix maps country maturity to all these stages, and these stages were identified and confirmed by members and their own experience. And the progression matrix reflects a theory of change behind the measurement framework. It is not about ranking. It doesn't matter where the country is today, but it matters the country were yesterday and where they're going to be tomorrow. It is about making continued progress. Let's look at some highlights in this reporting cycle is the last 2 years. 11 countries introduced their first national sustainable finance frameworks. 22 countries launched additional policy documents to strengthen their existing sustainable finance frameworks. And 21 countries moved forward in the overall progression matrix. 6 countries, 5 existing and 1 new member countries made rapid progress, leapfrogging 2 stages by learning from others. Next slide, please. And the 4th key finding is a roadmap that shows a typical sequence in the development and implementation of national sustainable finance framework. It is based on their own experience. Countries can vary in their starting points to kickstart the enabling framework, either from banking or capital market regulator or banking association. The core element is a national ambition for sustainable finance and ESG management. National sustainable finance frameworks and initiatives become more robust and mature when multi-year on the comparative data start to emerge. And over time, most countries tend to expand their framework to embrace all parts of the financial sector, covering risk and opportunity in a comprehensive way. Next slide, please. There are 10 cross-cutting themes emerged from the detailed data analysis across all the 3 pillars of the SBFN measurement framework. And the first 7 themes were covered in the previous slides briefly. So I want to highlight the number 8 to 10 marked in green. Biodiversity is one of the next big themes, modeled on the TCFD and linked to climate mitigation. We have seen some progress in some of the member countries start to tackle biodiversity challenges, but also embrace opportunities. Financial inclusion is a core to the sustainable finance and interacts with other topics, including climate change and gender. The role of the governing bodies has become central to the ESG performance, the G of the ESG, climate risk management, and ensuring credibility of sustainability-focused instruments, particular transition finance. Next slide, please. The report put forward a set of recommendations. First is to the SBFN members at the country level, including broaden the understanding of national sustainable finance roadmap to recognize the diversity of approaches and starting points. Second, expand and deepening framework for managing ESG risk as the foundation. And third, fast-track the development of climate risk guidance and tools. And fourth, support the continued expansion and sustainable finance beyond grain. Last but not least, strengthen and align data and the disclosure requirement. Next slide, please. This, I will not actually, this second of collection action is for SBFN community. I will not go through the detail because my next slides respond to some of the recommendations. So next slide, please. So first, this is a set of actions for SBFN member Secretariat to convene the collective actions of the community. The first is continue to convene working groups to collect country experience, map best practice, and develop common approaches. We have 4 working groups. And second, increase the support to members in planning and delivering their capacity building programs. And third is continue to facilitate knowledge exchange and support public-private dialogue at local, regional, and international levels. We're doing it now. And fourth is develop interactive online analytical tools and resources. Next slide, please. So responding to my last point about online resources, I'm glad to share with you, next slide, with you a number of resources available now, and in the next couple of months, we will list all these tools and resources available to all the SBFN members and also become a public goods for the broader financial community. So as a conclusion, I want to stress that SBFN Global and Country Progress Report were developed by and for members and also a public goods for the broader community. We encourage you to use them to help your national sustainable finance journey and join force to advance the regional and global sustainable finance movement together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rong, for such a comprehensive summary of the findings from the Global Progress Report. Next, we move on to the panel discussions. The first panel is dedicated to environmental, social, and governance considerations as the main component of sustainable finance. The moderator for the panel is Mr. Boris Janjalia, who is a corporate governance officer at IFC and a regional coordinator in Europe at SBFN. Boris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mariam. Many thanks, Ron. It was a very interesting brief of the Global Progress Report that indicates current trends in sustainable finance. Dear colleagues, greetings. Let me also, in the beginning, express my gratitude to the National Bank of Georgia for co-hosting this Sustainable Finance Forum, and also express my gratitude to the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, SECO, for the generous support of our advisory program, ESG advisory program in Europe and Central Asia. And I also would like to welcome all participants, especially the newest SBFN member, the Central Bank of Armenia. I'm very glad to moderate the first session of this forum that is called Environmental, Social and Governance, indispensable component of sustainable finance. As we know, there are different definitions of sustainable finance, and ESG is a core part. For instance, if we follow the European Union definition, sustainable finance is the provision of finance to investments considering environmental, social, and governance considerations. SBFN also plays paramount attention to ESG, specifying its vital importance by having a separate ESG integration pillar as part of its measurement framework. As SBFN Global Progress Report indicates, 32 countries, around 74% of members, have launched the ESG framework reporting requirements and highlighted the governance of environmental and social importance. Also, it's notable that 15 countries have already introduced systematic ESG data collection to track its implementation. I think these figures underline the importance of ESG for any sustainable finance framework. With this short forward, I would like to introduce our distinguished panelists. Today we have with us Mr. David Utiashvili, Head of Financial Stability Department at the National Bank of Georgia, Ms. Caroline Bright, Regional ESG Advisory Lead at IFC for Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Latin America, Middle East, and Turkey. Also, we have today with us Mr. Kiran Rajpandit, Director of the Banks and Financial Institutions Regulation Department at the Nepal Rastra Bank, and also Mr. Maxim Ribanov, Commissioner, National Securities and Stock Market Commissioner for Ukraine. I believe our audience would receive the bios of our speakers. So for the sake of time, I will proceed with the panel discussion right away. I would like to start this session with Mr. David Utiashvili, who leads Financial Stability Department at the National Bank of Georgia. Dear David, first of all, many thanks to you and your team for co-hosting this event and for very fruitful collaboration with SBFN and IFC. We all know that the National Bank of Georgia has made a significant progress in developing its sustainable framework in Georgia, sustainable finance framework in Georgia. And I think we should mention that your sustainable finance journey started with a corporate governance code for commercial banks that addressed environmental, social governance considerations. The code was adopted in 2018. It was updated in June 2021 and introduced more streamlined ESG provisions. And for the first time mentions the need to address the climate risk. Could you please tell us why you started your sustainable finance journey with ESG, and also elaborate a bit more about recent changes in the CG code? David, over to you.
Boris, thanks for introduction, and thanks for your help all this time developing our framework, and thanks for IFC and SBFN for contributing to today's conference and all the participants. It's a pleasure to be here. Regarding your questions, let me share the presentation. So that will be probably more useful. Please confirm if you see it. Yeah. As you have mentioned, like I'm from Financial Stability Department, and my team is generally in a leadership of developing sustainable finance framework in Georgia. That's because like we strongly believe that incorporating environmental, social, and sustainability issues in central bank policies is a key for financial stability. So taking that point, like back to 2017, we have started to develop our framework, sustainable finance framework, and we started to imply consideration of social and environmental governance issues in the financial sector and capital market participants' decision making. And good thing for Georgia is that central bank is also a regulator for financial sector, so we have all the tools to implement the policies we need within the financial sector. And back in 2019, we have, as Governor has mentioned, we have introduced a roadmap for sustainable finance in Georgia, and it summarizes all the possible actions that MBG at that time was intended to implement for next 3 years. And actually, if we look at the pillars, you know, this is a comprehensive document, but there are 4 main pillars. First one is a capacity building and awareness increase in the financial sector, and in the market participants also who are related to financial sector. And then it's very important because the framework we have is kind of still a voluntary. Of course, we mandate banks to do something, but we believe that ultimate objectives will be achieved if banks themselves and financial sector participants are convinced towards sustainable finance objectives. Next one is a guidance to guide the financial flows towards sustainable developments, and of course that's a kind of an ultimate objective. That's what we need to achieve at the end. And also next one is to ensure the incorporation of ESG risk management is a decision making of financial institutions, because we don't want to have a kind of a framework which remains on the shelf or is the documents. We need it to be embedded in the decision making of the financial institutions, and that's what we always try to achieve. And the final one is of course the transparency. which is important to ensure there is a level playing field with the market participants, and also to ensure that market discipline works, because that's an additional tool for controlling the achievements. Another document which we have issued recently is a sustainable finance status report, and that status report summarizes, current trends and policies and some upcoming initiatives what we are running right now. And that document is already available on our website, and that will be kind of annual publication which will measure our progress towards ESG objectives. And also in this document we also have we also published the kind of ESG forms which we mandated banks to publish annually, and those forms disclose all the information what banks have achieved and what are the policies and practices they have, and also some of the numerical statistics in particular, this reporting we also mandated banks to include in the Pillar 3 disclosure form, which is kind of a formal disclosure for all the prudential requirements and all the financial sector sensitive statistics. This is the first year for publication, and we all understand the limitations by it. We have seen some blank areas in the publications, but it's normal for the first year. And also one of the constraints there was that banks themselves did not have kind of internal classification of loans, for example, which one is a green loan, and that's a big concern, and that's what we are trying to achieve by introducing a common taxonomy. This taxonomy document will be further discussed by Salome on the next panel in details. And as it was mentioned, like it's a kind of global trend to ensure that there is some consistency across the data which are published by market participants. The next document we are currently working is ESG risk management guidelines. We do it with the help of IFC, this document also will help us to have some consistency across the risk management and across the banks. Another document is a scorecard, which will be a progress management tool, and also it's done with the help of IFC. And we also have to implement this framework next year. Another area what we are working is climate change risk assessment. Of course, we acknowledge risks related to climate change, which then affects the macroeconomic and financial stability. We have started already to work on this. Of course, the basic element there is the data collection, which sectors are exposed to physical or transition risks in Georgia, and then we are also in parallel collecting data from commercial banks. What are their exposures to those sectors? Next, we will employ a GFS climate scenario to do some calculations, what are overall our risks. And in parallel, we also working on a climate stress testing exercise, which will be an additional tool to check where our banks stand in terms of some stress environment, whether they're ready for it or not, or have sufficient mitigating tools. This is done in cooperation with German Sparkassen Stiftung for International Cooperation. To sum up, this shows some of our progress, a tangible progress we have done for the last several years. But to be honest, we believe that we have some more ambitious agenda ahead. So we hope that for the next year conference, maybe we'll have much longer presentation with much more achievements. At least we are optimistic for this. We all understand that there was COVID-19, which has backdrops for commercial banks as well. Like it complicated and slightly made it harder to achieve some of our objectives, but still we had some progress, and we are hopeful for some more the next year. That was briefly what I could mention about our framework. All the documents I have mentioned is on our website, so if anybody is interested in details, everybody can access to it.
Thank you. That lots of things happening at the same time. Great to see that, and at the same time, I can see that you many times mentioned ESG. So I think your approach, the National Bank of Georgia's approach, one more time underlines the importance of ESG for the sustainable finance framework. You also mentioned reporting, ESG reporting and disclosure principles, which National Bank of Georgia adopted in 2020, and actually the main target group for these principles is commercial banks. And this is a first year, 2021, it's the first year when the Georgian banks provided the ESG reports to you. I think it would be very interesting to all of us know about the key findings of this first wave of reports.
Sure, I can share some of the findings what we have in our status report as well. First, we can start with the green loan. Here, the constraint was that 6 out of 15 banks, we have 15 banks in the system. 6 out of them only provide some data on green loans. That again suggests that there are some deficiencies in terms of, they don't have internal framework or classification for a green loan. And those who provided the data on it, they mainly included like loans related to energy efficiency or renewable energy projects. So the numbers we have are underestimated, we believe, but again, once we have taxonomy in place, probably we'll have a much better picture. In terms of the numbers they have reported, by the end of 2020, around 400 million USD was the amount of green loans. And if you look at the flows, the loans issued in 2020, we had quite good credit growth in 2020 despite pandemic. And if we take the share, the green loan was around 6% on average. Of course, it was different bank by banks, as the highest number was 17. But we believe that once we have taxonomy, we will probably see a higher number here. And as you see from the chart, it's mainly foreign currency that might be driven from the fact that that portfolio is largely a kind of on lending from IFI's portfolio, which are targeted to green loans. And in the future, we hope that also local currency funding will be available for green loans, and we will see higher share of GEL loans in green portfolio. Next one is the social aspects. And if you look at the employment distribution, like 67% of employees are female in our banking sector. However, if you look at the higher level management, that number stands around 22%, so it's relatively low. And also in this publication, so ESG reportings, we have asked the banks, to also share the policies and documents related to social aspects, and also the procedures they have, like and many of them, what we see, most of them have some related documents like occupational safety plans, labor safety policy, emergency action plans, and also recently, of course, the COVID-19 related documents. And also they put some significant resources on staff training, and you see some age distributions also in this chart, what they report in our forms. And finally, related to governance issues, majority of commercial banks have designated officer or a body responsible for overseeing environmental and social policies and practices in banks. And of course, like it was very hard for them. It was the new topic for some of them. We understand it was very hard to find corresponding staff on those positions, but we hope that for the next year publication, we will have all 15 banks and all of them will have such body responsible within the bank. And also 9 banks reported that they have some ESG policies and procedures in place. Mostly it's related to ESG risk management, and we also hope here that next year it will be a 15 bank. This is a first-time publication, so we have not been very tough on this, and we understand the limitations. But next year we hope to see no blank areas in these ESG forms. So that was briefly what I could say. If there are any questions, I'm happy.
Thanks so much, David. I think these findings are very interesting, especially those related to diversity, also the steps that have been taken by the financial sector. Good to see that, banks have already introduced this position in their structure and they're moving forward. I think next year we'll have more achievements in that regard. Once again, many thanks. We are wishing you more and more achievements and look forward to the next steps of our collaboration with the National Bank of Georgia. And we are also very much hope next year we'll hold this event in person and host many of our colleagues in Tbilisi. Dear colleagues, we will have the Q&A session after the panel discussion. So you can ask your questions to David and other panelists then. And you can also put the questions in the chat box and we will address them in the Q&A session. With your permission, I will move now to our next panelist, Ms. Caroline Bright. As I mentioned, Caroline is Regional ESG Advisory Lead at IFC for Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Latin America, Middle East, and Turkey. Quite a big scope of activities. Dear Caroline, thank you for being with us today. You lead IFC ESG advisory activities in more than 15 countries. And I think it will be very interesting for all of us, to learn more about your advisory work and about the key challenges and opportunities you face in promoting sustainable finance and especially the ESG component.
Yes, thank you so much, Boris. I hope you can all hear me okay. I'm actually very honored to be here on this panel and with you all today. It was a pleasure to join the in-person event a couple of years ago, and I also am very keen to get back to visit Georgia and do that again in person. It's a real honor for me to be following how well Georgia is making progress. And with that, let me put that into the context of how we work in our ESG advisory, as you ask. So we have an integrated ESG advisory program, and this is supported by SECO, by the Swiss State Secretariat of Economic Affairs. So I would like to again thank them for their support, because without that support, we wouldn't be here today. SECO has been a long-term partner supporting our work, firstly in corporate governance and now in integrated environmental, social, and governance, and in particular in supporting the work we do in the financial sector. So what do we do? So together with the support from SECO and with our partners, what we aim to do is to promote the uptake of good ESG, environmental, social, and governance, or sustainability practices in our target markets. And this is to drive more sustainable investment into these markets, like Georgia and many countries that are represented today. ESG is a way to manage risk, but also to find opportunities for growth and investment in a sustainable manner. How do we do that? So in our integrated ESG program, we have 3 pillars, or levers, if you like, which together we believe will help move our markets to sustainability. We have a regulatory framework pillar, market capacity, and also working with firms and financial institutions. And as you asked, Boris, there are opportunities and of course challenges in each of those pillars. Let me briefly talk about each pillar. So the regulatory framework. What we're trying to do with regulators is to support them in their journey to put in place the right guidance, regulation, codes, the whole framework to encourage sustainable growth, which does not harm the planet or people. That's essentially what ESG is really trying to do. So in particular, we work with financial sector regulators like the National Bank of Georgia to help them develop the right policies and guidance that shift financial institutions to consider the long-term impact of their activities and better manage these ESG or so-called non-financial risks. And with that, I would again like to thank the National Bank of Georgia for hosting the event today. They really have been an excellent partner for IFC in this journey, and we're very proud of the progress that you are making. And the opportunities are huge. I'm sure everybody who's joined today paid attention to COP26 and heard about the opportunities that were mentioned there. And we all heard talk of $130 trillion US in investment to support a sustainable future. That's been pledged. The message is there's a lot of money out there that's looking for sustainable investment opportunities. I think the greatest challenge we see is channeling that money to the right companies for sustainable investment. And it's policies like that which National Bank of Georgia is putting in place, sustainable finance principles, ESG guidance, all of this that's indispensable, as we've heard, to sustainable finance. This is what can make that happen, can make that money go to the right projects that really are truly sustainable and part of the solution to the challenges that we're seeing. So that's what we do at the regulatory space. We also want to work at the market level, and we want to build local capacity for ESG. So we have selected market intermediaries, market partners that we work with, and these vary from associations, consulting firms, institutes, even universities, to build their capacity on ESG, to provide training, to provide consulting services, to provide advice, and to promote the uptake of ESG more broadly. And one of the challenges here, of course, is finding partners who have that same mindset that we have and really see that opportunity. And we're very lucky, I have to say, in Georgia, that we have some excellent committed partners who are ready to build their offerings in ESG. And we thank them for joining with us on this journey. And then finally, let me talk about firm level briefly, where we work with both firms in the real sector and the financial sector to help them adopt better ESG practices. And that helps them access this money, the sustainable finance flows that are coming, including from organizations like IFC. As Ivana said in her introductory remarks, many organizations like IFC who pay attention to these ESG issues when we make investment decisions. And we're not the only ones. And more investors are looking at ESG when they make their investment decisions. So it is critical. And just to conclude, I mean, I'd just like to say that the key point, as the title of this session says, ESG is an indispensable component of sustainable finance. It's indispensable for the recipients of that finance and for the providers of that finance. And of course, for the regulators like the National Bank of Georgia, who want to channel that finance to the right players in the market. And it is a huge opportunity, I believe, for all of us, including our market partners, in order to encourage and enable that sustainable finance to happen. Thank you. Back to you, Boris.
Thank you, Caroline. I think all this information should be very interesting to our guests, and I fully agree with you. The COP26 definitely introduced lots of new opportunities and challenges at the same time. So we have today different categories of participants attending this forum, including regulators and financial institutions. And while regulatory framework is paramount for the development of the sustainable finance framework, contribution by the private sector is also vitally important. And could you please share with us how ESG advisory program can support individual financial institutions in developing the ESG arrangements? I think it will be very helpful to know to our participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Boris. Yes, you make a great point. The private sector is key, and it's key to get all these different players involved, because it's not, the shift is not going to happen with just one player. It takes all of us. And yes, financial institutions are a key partner in this area, and we would like to support them in their shift to introducing and integrating ESG into their DNA, if you like. So IFC, we can indeed support financial institutions in ESG in a number of ways beyond just providing finance. And also not just the banks, but we can also work with private equity funds, institutional investors, the full range of financial institutions, I would say. And how can we help? Well, I like to see ESG framework as being composed of a number of different core elements. It's not just one thing. And I like to see it as starting at the top, starting at the board and the governance of the institution. Governance of and for sustainability, and it's critical. If the board is not engaged and doesn't understand its role in this, then whatever practices are introduced by the financial institution, it's never going to be fully fully part of their DNA. So we do work with boards on helping them understand how they can oversee and integrate ESG. But it's not just the board, of course. It has to go deep into the systems of the financial institution. And this system has to integrate environmental and social risk management into its operations. It shouldn't be a tag along, it should be integrated into the bank's existing systems. And we can help financial institutions with developing their environmental and social management systems. And what does this do? It allows that institution, the financial institution, to identify and manage the environmental and social risks in its business, not only its direct operations, but also in its portfolio, in its lending or investment activities, to categorize its loans, as we heard David talking about earlier, to understand what it is doing and what the risks are from environmental and social aspects. So putting in place due diligence to really manage those risks. And this has to feed into a system that is truly embedded into the bank or the financial institutions organization so that they can track and monitor those risks. And that leads me to my third component, which is reporting. It's critical that it's in a system so that firstly, you can report to the board. The board needs to understand the ESG risks in its operations, but beyond the board, of course, the institution has to report to the supervisor, to the National Bank of Georgia, but also beyond that to lenders like IFC. So reporting and making sure it has the right KPIs, it all has to be integrated into the bank system so that it becomes a normal part of bank operations. And IFC can help financial institutions in all these areas. And based on this core set of structures and systems, the financial institution can go further. It can introduce climate finance. It can introduce energy efficiency products. All these sustainable finance products that David also mentioned, they're critical as part of the solution. And our colleagues at IFC that we'll hear about on later panels can also offer advisory in this space. But you can't have these product offerings without the core ESG systems in place that are needed for a financial institution to embrace sustainable finance. So to sum up, IFC and our local partners are ready to support financial institutions in this sustainability journey to build up the systems that they need, I think, to be ready for a financial system that we need in the 21st century to meet all of the challenges that we read about and we see every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Thanks so much. Indeed, the role of the board is very important in overseeing environmental social risk management, and especially managing environmental and social risk is paramount aspect of proper functioning of the entire sustainable finance framework and establishing trust towards the sustainable finance products of financial institutions. And also it's one of the key challenges for many regulators and especially financial institutions. I think it will be interesting for this forum participants to learn experience of the regulators that have already progressed in this direction and introduced environmental social risk management regulations for their market participants. And we are privileged today to have with us Mr. Kiran Raj Pandit, who is Director of the Banks and Financial Institutions Regulation Department at the Nepal Rastra Bank, the Central Bank of Nepal. And Mr. Pandit led the work on developing the environmental and social risk management regulations for financial institutions. Dear Kiran, first of all, many thanks for joining the Sustainable Finance Forum. As I said, the topic of environmental social risk management is still new for many regulators and financial institutions. And could you please share with us experience of the Nepal Rastra Bank, the development of the environmental social risk management guidelines for financial institutions, and also to provide information what are the key components of the Nepal environmental social risk management program. Over to you.
Thank you, Boris. Hello, everyone. Hello, colleagues from National Bank of Georgia and my friends from Sustainable Banking and Finance Network. So let me share a few slides with you so that I can share what was our journey and how did we progress on it, and what are the components of our guideline. So hope my slides are visible. To start the journey, I'd like to briefly share some of our environmental or climate risk, how the Nepal is vulnerable to this risk. Our data show that between 1971 to 2019, almost 647 people died because of the climate-induced events. And likewise, our average economic loss is around 0.08% of GDP, that is 2,778 million, which counts for. And then floods in 2017 alone, we faced a loss of around 2% of our GDP. So these are just a glimpse that how vulnerable is Nepal. Once there was a massive cloud burst in 1993, which washed away 6 bridges in our highway and which cut the capital city from the rest of the country for 21 days. Likewise, a land failure in the highway, it caused the closure of highway for 11 days. So mainly the landslides, pollution of the rivers, the wildfires, these are the major climate risks of Nepal. And I hope all of you know there was a mega earthquake in 2015, which we faced, and that there were huge casualties. So with this glimpse, I just want to enter into the journey of the Nepal. We have actually, Nepal has started to talk about environmental impact since 1980s. And in 1993, we came up with a national environmental impact assessment guidelines. And then in 2019, we got our Environmental Protection Act. Actually, there was an older act in 1997. It was revised in 2019. And the other act that talks about labor issues is Labor Act 2017. So you might have heard that the issues of child labor and the labor conflicts, workplace safety, these are the major issues which raised our concern toward the sustainable financing. The waste management, because the people are disposing their polluted water in the river, as we are so much rich in our water resources. But water pollution is also very high. Likewise, air pollution, deforestation, the use of pesticides and chemicals, these all are the issues that made us feel that sustainable financing is needed to ensure the credit does not flow to the projects which have environmental and social risk. We want to promote the environment-friendly projects, encourage green financing. So for this, we started to work with mainly with IFC. Since 2010, IFC was working with few banks, and in 2014 we initiated our discussion with IFC to draft the environmental and social risk guidelines. Through the multiple series of discussions and field visits, we came up with the first draft. Then in 2017, we came up with a draft and we emphasized the sustainable development. There was at that time, as a regulator, Nepal Rastra Bank faced a dilemma whether to issue this fresh guideline, fresh set of rules as just as a guideline or as compulsory directives. After the series of discussion, we decided to issue it as a guideline, which is not mandatory, but it was to encourage our banks and financial institutions to look after the environmental and social risks. So we issued guidelines in 2018, and then after 2 years of that issuance, we made it a compulsory directive. So beyond this guideline, we have other policies to encourage some green sectors, like 15% of the bank's portfolio should be in agriculture sector. I won't say that 100% agriculture sector is green. Maybe a lot of use of pesticides or chemicals are there, but still 15% of portfolio should be in agriculture, as well as 10% should be in energy. And luckily in Nepal, we don't have other fossil fuel energy. We have hydropower and solar power. So 10% of our bank's portfolio will be in that sector, which is more sustainable. And our government of Nepal has also some subsidized loan programs, which give subsidy to the agriculture projects. Now, as Boris has asked me to share about the guidelines also, I'll just briefly give you the glimpse of the guideline that we have prepared with the support from IFC. Here, the basic principle, the basic framework is if your client, the borrower, is not managing their environmental and social risks, then that will impose risk to the BFIs, and that will bring some financial consequences. These are not only environmental thing. Ultimately, the bank may face the loss, which will impact their bottom line. So loss of assets, reduced profits, or the damage of reputation can be the ultimate impact for the banks and financial institutions. It is not only the issue for the client, not only for the borrower. We cannot overlook that, okay, the borrower is having some unsafe construction site, or they are discharging their chemicals in the rivers, but that can impact your business too. That is how the framework goes. In our guideline issued to the banks and financial institutions, we have defined the typical risks for the clients, all these environmental risks, and then how this risk will bring risks to the BFIs. That is what we have defined over there. And then we have talked about the applicability of this guideline, how you can apply it differently to the different size of the bank's loan. And this guideline has also spelled out that IFC standards, the performance standards of IFC are preferable to be adhered to. Otherwise, all the national norms, international norms, and the norms followed by the international leaders are the standards. And then this guideline also talks about the environmental and social risk management system. I don't want to go into these details given the constraint of time, because this guideline clearly says as per the size of the loan, you have to take the stringent measures in very short. So given the ESMS, the major component is how you do the due diligence. So in this guideline, the main crux of this guideline is this flow chart. So in this part, what we have said is, first you have to check whether your project is in exclusion list or not. Those are the restricted list. If it is there, don't invest on that. So if it is not there, then go for the environmental and social due diligence. So if it is a small loan, then just check whether there are some critical issues or not. If no, then it's fine. Otherwise, if it is a term finance or it is a project finance, then ask for environmental impact assessment reports. And luckily in Nepal, our law also spells out that environmental and social risk impact assessment is mandatory. So banks are required to go through that report. If your borrower has made some commitment or they have some plans, then banks are required to follow those norms or those plans, just to have some monitoring on those things. So this is how we have spelled out in our guidelines. I'll share the link over here so that if somebody is interested, you can go through the guideline. So Boris, in a very brief, mainly we want our banks to include environmental and social risk due diligence in their credit appraisal, in their credit assessments. Over to you, Boris.
Thanks so much, Kiran. It's very interesting information, and I had a chance to look at your document, and this flow chart is really amazing. You know, it provides very detailed explanation of steps that should be taken by the financial market players. Yeah, we have some restraints in terms of time, but I would like to ask you a brief question about what are, what been the key development in implementation challenges that you as a regulator faced, and also, also the financial sector faced with respect to implementation, and how you managed to respond to them.
Thank you, Boris. To continue with that question, I'll share some initiatives and challenges. That is what we have faced. First, how we worked with BFIs is, as I have already showed you our timeline, it started from 2010. So we have a long decade of experience, but still we feel that we are still in a very nascent stage, and we are just learning something new. Mainly during those days, we started with the discussion. We prepare our banks and financial institutions with series of discussions and interactions. We incorporated their ideas, or we shared these ideas to them while formulating the guidelines. Also, IFC also closely worked with these fraternity. And then IFC is currently also working with the capacity building, as well as we have emphasized capacity building. And then to see how the implementation is going on, we have our offsite and onsite supervisions also. That is with the BFIs, but within the regulator, what we did is there is an interdepartmental cooperation, like supervision departments were involved, the regulation department is involved, and we have a committee which is headed by deputy governor, that is known as regulation committee. So it went through the regulation committee, and the governor is there. With all these coordination, we issued guideline in 2018. We did a checklist check. We got that checklist from IFC, and then we did a survey with the banks. And then after knowing that some of them are really coming up with their policies, and some are still facing the challenges, then we thought that now we have to make it mandatory. Now somehow the industry is being prepared. So in 2020 we issued a circular saying that the guideline is mandatory, and in 2021 to continue with these changes, we have again made an agreement with IFC to update our ESRM. So during this, what the challenges we faced, Boris, as you're asking me, is in the initial days, we saw some sort of reluctancy, and still there is some level of reluctancy in the industry, because it involves cost, it involves extra effort, because these all are for the risk management thing, and you are doing something for your control function rather than investing in your business function. So you have to invest on your policies, people, and processes. So they were taking it as a cost center rather than a business or profit center. So there was some level of reluctancy. And then the other thing, the big thing, was the fear factor. They were with a view that we may lose the business if I ask for all these environmental standards to be adhered by the borrowers, then I may lose the business and the borrower may go to another bank. So this was the initial response, but we kept on talking with them, we kept on discussing with them, and we said that it applies to the industry, not only to an individual bank. So it was some sort of reluctancy in those days. But now, as the banks are integrating with their international partners, banks are also realizing that they need to have some sustainable financing or green financing policies. They should not ignore environmental and social risk. And the other thing I personally feel is there can be another issue, like whether it is they are doing it for the compliance or they are really committed. As a regulator, we think that they should be committed rather than just following the compliance. We believe that development should happen, employment should be there, income generation should be there, production should be there. But now, after with all these policies, what we are trying to reinforce is sustainability should be there, debt financing should be there, but BFI should scrutinize the project on the basis of environmental and social risks, so that we can have some greener and sustainable approach. And for the days to come, we feel that it will be accepted as an integral part of credit appraisal and loan covenants. We feel that initiatives from banks and financial institutions will rather they'll take initiation on their own rather than just as a regulatory medium, as I was telling you. And then I feel that it is not only for the banks and the regulator. It should be the integrated approach from all the authorities. Line ministries should be there, capital markets should be there, investors, as well as international agencies. These all should be working in integrated approach to accept some international best practices. And for the days to come, in our table, we are discussing to develop green taxonomy, and we are working closely with AFI, Alliance for Financial Inclusion, for this green taxonomy, as I saw that in the plan of Georgia also. But Georgia is a bit ahead in terms of green data, and we are trying to develop green data so that we can have some disclosures, as well as we are trying to update our guideline. So this is what in our plan. In my slide, I have kept two pictures also to wrap up. The upper one is the usual view, and the lower one is during the winter when we get haze and all the forest, wild forest fires because of that. So to conclude, I would like to reinforce that it is an evolving process. It takes time. It takes time because it is not one of that you issue a guideline and it gets green everywhere. It is green. No, it needs some commitment, top level commitment, and it needs collective efforts from all the related parties. And as our colleagues were also emphasizing, capacity building should be there, and there is no alternative. We should be saving our earth. Over to you, Boris.
Many thanks, Hiram. Yeah, I fully agree with you that there should be integrated approach, there should be a dialogue, and the industry should be committed and take steps to implement the environmental social risk regulation. And I think the two pictures you showed us, it's a great evidence that we should work in that direction, and this is very, very important. Once again, many thanks for sharing your experience. I believe there will be questions and on the implementation or development of your environmental social risk management framework. And of course, they are really needed. This system is paramount to develop truly sustainable finance products and build trust of investors in these products. And you also mentioned capital markets. And dear colleagues, I think we all agree that financial institutions play a leading role in providing finance to tackle climate change, and it's very important that they have sound environmental, social, and governance arrangements. Financial institutions, they have these arrangements in place. At the same time, we can see the increasing number of corporations issuing green bonds, sustainability bonds, to implement environmentally friendly projects. And this trend has also reflected and impacted SBFN, as many of our new SBFN members are capital market regulators, and one of them is the National Securities and Stock Market Commission of Ukraine. They joined SBFN in July 2020, and today we have with us Commissioner Maxim Libanov, who leads the sustainable finance work of the Commission. Maxim, great to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us for this Sustainable Finance Forum. I know that you also have another presentation today on the green bonds regulation in Ukraine, and I will provide some forward here. And our collaboration with the Commission started from the development of corporate governance code with ESG sustainability provisions that Commission adopted in March 2020. In July 2021, the Commission adopted the green bond issuers regulation that also address environmental, social, governance considerations. And we also collaborated with the Commission on the development of ESG supplement to the corporate governance code. And I know that there are a few more corporate ESG-related documents in your pipeline. And yeah, I think it will be interesting to all of our participants to provide a bit more information about these initiatives and why ESG is so important for the Commission. Over to you, Maxim.
Thank you, Boris. It's my pleasure to be at this forum. Yeah, I'm just switched between two events. We currently finished our local event here in Ukraine about green bonds and new opportunities for green financing. Yes, sustainable finance and green finance in particular is one of our main topics in our agenda, and we are here in Commission in Ukraine working deeply on this issue, and many thanks to IFC and to you personally, Boris, when you were here in Kyiv regional office. We work very closely on different issues and different aspects of implementing into Ukraine legislation various aspects of sustainable finance. If I may take a couple of minutes and back to history, initially we started to look deeply in this area a couple of years ago when we started to develop our legal framework. The most prominent part of it was development of a new capital markets law, which took us almost 5 years to develop and pass through Ukrainian parliament. But finally, we got it through last year, and in this new law on capital markets, we introduced a new separate article which is dedicated specifically to green bonds as a specific instrument among all other corporate bonds and other types of debt instrument. And we did it because we had a strong belief that green finance is a quickly developing market, and here in Ukraine and globally we have a very big potential on both sides, issuer and investors. And as a regulator of capital markets, our main goals are to protect investors, to develop markets which are transparent, with which are consistent, and which are integrity markets. Introducing regulations developed dedicated to ESG principles in particular is one of our more wider work in respect of corporate governance, because we think that corporate governance is one of crucial issues which is absolutely necessary for developing transparent markets. And ESG as a part of corporate governance is a new topic which is not very widely used by companies, and we need to raise awareness as well as develop proper regulations, both hard law and soft law. Yes, 2 years ago we adopted a new corporate governance code of Ukraine, where we initially introduced some basic provisions related to ESG issues, and now we are finalizing a separate supplement to this corporate governance code, which will be fully dedicated to ESG issues, and will explain in details and provide best practices how ESG should be introduced in modern and comprehensive corporate governance, starting from board of directors or supervisory board, how goals and tasks for a board should be set, and continuing with various internal documents which should cover some issues related to ESG principles. We hope to finalize this ESG supplement till the end of this year, and it will become a first document in Ukraine which will be specifically dedicated to such kind of issues. And at the same time, we are working in developing underlying legislation, which is part of hard law, because obviously corporate governance code and ESG supplement is a soft law. It's just a number of list of best practices and recommendations which issuers could follow, or they could explain why they deviate from it. But it's not obligatory, and it's not mandatory for listed companies, for issuers of bonds, and so on. But at the same time, as I already mentioned, we're developing underlying legislation which should develop this article on green bonds, which was introduced into new capital markets law this year. And in particular, we are working now on two basic documents. One of them is general document about corporate bonds, how they should be issued, and how they could be traded and executed, transactions. In this corporate bonds document, we will dedicate a separate title to green bonds and describe specifics which arise on issuer side when issuer wants to make this green bond issue, where issuer have to prepare internal documents, describe this green project, and one of crucial issues which we want to cover is protecting investors from greenwashing, which from our side, one of the key elements of proper regulation and avoiding any market abuse in sphere of sustainable and green financing. And second document, which we also have in our pipeline, is a document which is dedicated to disclosure rules and disclosure requirements for issuers, of green bonds because we understand that in comparison to usual or ordinary corporate bonds, green bonds require more disclosure of information, in particular about green project which is being financed through green bonds issue, and about usage of funds of money which were raised by green bonds issue, and all other various aspects of green project which is being financed. So that's what we have currently in pipeline. I hope that we will finalize those documents in the next couple of months, and this will create a comprehensive legal framework here in Ukraine and create a great boost for our market.
Actually, many thanks. Many thanks. I think it's your example is very interesting in many ways. Your green bond regulation, since I think provides lots of ESG related provisions, and the role of the board, you know, the need to have a verifier, selection of the verifier, involvement of the supervisory board in all these processes. So this key component is very important, and I think it's a very good indication how ESG is important for the Commission. And I can see also Alla has joined us, Alla Papaika from the Commission, your colleague. So I'm using this opportunity, I would like to thank your entire team, the Commission, personally you and your team for the very effective collaboration which we have had. And I also wish you all the best in your future endeavors. I'm confident your initiatives, all of them, they will be very, very successful. As we are about to close this panel and we are actually behind the time, I would like to thank all our panelists for their contributions, and I would like to open a Q&A session. So dear colleagues, please ask your questions. You can also put them in the chat. So we have this Q&A session open. If there are no questions for the moment, I could see one question which was, you know, Rustam Tahirov asked this question in chat. The question is the following: are the ESG requirements for financial institutions, banks, mandatory or serve as a guidance in Georgia? So this is the first question. The second one is about taxonomy preparation, but I believe we can address this question in our second panel discussion. So David, I believe this question goes to you. So about ESG requirements for financial institutions, banks, are they mandatory or serve as guidance in Georgia?
Thanks for this question. So the requirements are mandatory. So we have two requirements also mainly. There's like there are the amendments in corporate governance code, and the corporate governance code is a mandatory document. Another one was like amendments in disclosure for Pillar 3, and they are like we mandated banks to publish what they do regarding the ESG issues, their policy documents, and also numerical statistics. But the here thing is that like it is mandatory, but for as it was the first year, we had slightly like light touch supervision. So if a bank publishes a like disclosure form, but we see some blank items here, not necessarily the supervisory actions will follow for this year, for example. So normally, like if you mandate bank something and you see that it's not performed, normally, you know, supervisors, they will ask for additional capital or some penalties, but this is not happening for this year. But over time, of course, like there will be some monitoring of those forms, monitoring of corporate governance practices, and over time, like there will be a tighter supervision. We understand that's an initial year, but that's what will follow. So it is mandatory, and over time it will be stronger and stronger enforced that it's in practice as well. If I answered the question.
Thank you. yeah, Gustav, if you would like to have some more clarification, please let us know. We'll be glad to answer. I believe our colleagues from NBG will be glad to answer, provide more additional information. And I think I could.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Great. Thank you for asking this question. I think it's a very important question about the approach, how to start and implement the regulations. And I remember I saw Luis' question. Luis, maybe you will ask your question directly. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Boris. I think it's a comment to a number of the panelists linked the risk and opportunity side. And I think Georgia and Ukraine in particular are very good examples of best practice in the SBFN community, because coming with guidelines, new guidelines, we're seeing this trend of keep focusing on risk and opportunity at the same time. I think Nepal has done an amazing job of the risk management approach. And maybe they have some ideas now on how to bring the opportunity side in. But having also looked at the disclosure guidelines that NBG has brought in, you consistently ask for reporting from governance level on risks and opportunities and how the board is dealing with that. But that's quite advanced, and we see that works very well when that recommendation is brought in. I'm very interested to know what has been the response from the banks to this dual approach of, we want to know about risk, but we also want to know about opportunity thinking. Are you seeing some of that opportunity thinking starting? And where do you think those trends are? Where do you think that's going to get going?
Thanks for this question. So initially, probably, you know, especially when they coordinate with the supervisor or like the regulator, you know, they always complain about the costs, but we see more and more, like for in-person communication with the bank's senior management, that they see more and more opportunities, and most of all, the competition also works, because when they saw this publication, and some bank, you know, feel every aspect of it, or the reporting form, and they feel that they have this kind of procedures and so on. So it works as a moral suasion for other banks, especially for the senior management or the government board, asking their employees to do the same. Because, you know, initially there was a case that they were thinking that nobody has this, so they were thinking it's very hard. But when they saw that the competitor bank has it, they now are pressuring more probably their staff to do the same. So the moral suasion and competition works. So that's what we expected mostly. We don't want, you know, the process to be poorly supervision and cost driven. We want it to be driven by opportunities, and we are thinking that it's coming, and we hope for more. We hope that market outside of banks will start to think about it, and banks will see an opportunity in terms of attracting funding, which is green related or ESG related in general, and that will be additional incentive. And we see it's coming. Normally, currently it's from international markets, from IFIs, but we are hoping to have some local instruments as well. And that will be a game changer, I think.
Thank you, David. Dear colleagues, maybe any other question from your side? I think it's very interesting information to hear how our colleagues from the National Bank of Georgia have approached this regulation and its implementation. Also, you know, was a very good example from the colleague from Nepal. Maybe any other questions, dear colleagues? Okay, thank you so much. I think we had a wonderful panel discussion, and also we had two questions, but they were very interesting and very good questions. So,
Boris, just so you know, there's one more in the chat which relates.
Yeah, I can see it from Mr. Tofik Omarov. Thank you so much for asking this question. So the question is the following: which incentives have you introduced or consider introducing for green financial instruments? Thank you very much for this question, David. Mr. Tofik. David,
thank you.
I believe you answer, right?
Yeah, I may say about it. So far, like, probably there is no kind of a financial incentive from supervisor side. So we are thinking about several instruments, but you know, the instruments so far considered, maybe it includes a more penalty for not being green. So which we did not succeed. But we are thinking there are some instruments, and especially we want to have some local currency instruments. And there we are thinking, but let me not say right now, what are under considerations, because in practice so far we don't have it, any kind of financial incentive for banks from central bank side yet.
Thank you, David. Maybe any of our panelists will also respond to that question. Kenan, I was going to ask that to you. Thanks so much.
I fully agree with David regarding the opportunities also, because the opportunities, what I feel in our jurisdiction is once the banks are following these sustainable approaches, they can have better integration with their international partners. So this is a very good point for the Nepalese bankers. That's why they are taking their initiatives from their own. So this is one opportunity side. And regarding the incentives, I fully agree that that's a valid point. But as David has also said, we also don't have a direct incentive measure to follow the sustainable financing. But maybe it will be related, linked to the penalties or the sanctions. But so far, no incentives are there. Over to you, Boris.
Thank you so much, Kenan. Yeah, thank you for responding. Yeah, dear colleagues, I think we had a very interesting discussion. Of course, there are lots of opportunities and challenges as well. But I believe by taking this gradual approach, it will be, very beneficial for all participants, including regulators and financial institutions as well. If there are no more questions, I will close this panel, and I would like to express my gratitude to all panelists, also to all participants for their questions. And I very much hope that we will stay in touch. And if there are any questions, please let us know. We will be glad to provide additional information to all interested parties. And I'm passing the floor to Mariam now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Boris. We'll be taking a break now to catch your breath or maybe grab a cup of coffee. And we will be resuming the forum in 10 minutes. So please do come back at 12 p.m. Central Europe time. See you after the break.
Thanks.
Okay.
Welcome back. We will be resuming the forum now, and we have another panel on agenda for today. Panel number 2 focuses more on sustainable finance flows and opportunities. Let me invite to the floor the moderator for the Sustainable Finance Flow and Opportunities panel, Ms. Louise Gardiner, who is a coordinator, working groups coordinator, and Africa Regional Coordinator at SBFN. Louise, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mariam. And it's a pleasure to be here for the third annual Sustainable Finance Forum organized by National Bank of Georgia. It's been a pleasure to participate in the events over the years and to see your great progress. So thank you again for having us. So the topic for today's next panel is sustainable finance flows and opportunities, and it follows on very well from the discussion in the previous panel. So as my colleague Rong Zhang mentioned in her keynote presentation at the beginning on the results of our global progress report, which was recently published, we have 3 pillars that we look at for sustainable finance. One is ESG integration. The other is climate risk management, which is a new pillar. And the third pillar is financing sustainability. And it used to be a pillar where we just focused on the green bond trend. And in our 2019 report, it just focused on green bonds, green lending. But since then, we've seen an absolute explosion in interest in sustainability-focused finance. And we had to broaden the term quite extensively to capture what is being done in various countries. So first of all, the key trend that we saw is it's gone beyond green bonds, particularly in emerging markets. SBFN members have told us repeatedly that you can't do green without social. You have to do them together. They're interlinked, including the social impacts of climate change. That's very important in emerging markets. And we've seen a strong link with financial inclusion, which was very interesting because we started to see new sustainability focused bonds being issued during the COVID pandemic that either respond to COVID or respond to climate change, but with a focus on how women and vulnerable social groups are being affected by COVID, are being affected by climate change. And one of our panelists today, Mr. Yasser Moussi from the AMMC, the Capital Markets Authority of Morocco, he will tell us a bit about their work on things like gender bonds, where the financial inclusion link is very strongly there. So we've seen a move away from just green, and we've seen green, social, and sustainability bonds. We've seen sustainability-linked loans come onto the landscape, thanks to the Loan Market Association bringing in their guidance on how to issue sustainability-linked loans. And these are extremely flexible and versatile, and therefore we're seeing many more of these coming to market. And they respond very well to ESG disclosure requirements, which again is another topic that we touched on in the previous panel, but is particularly important for sustainable finance flows because you need to have the data, you need to know how companies are performing on ESG in order to identify projects and assets and activities that have these environmental and social benefits. So in the sustainability-linked loan market, we're seeing that companies with good disclosure on ESG become attractive to banks that want to identify where they can offer ESG linked loans. So, tying those loans to the performance on particular ESG goals. So we've definitely seen a proliferation of new instruments, and the most recent development in the market, which most of you will be aware of, is transition finance, which everyone's excited about because you can do climate finance, you can do green finance, but there are many businesses and activities that don't qualify for those particular categories. And yet those are the industries that we need to bring along in terms of their transition to a low carbon economy. And so it's actually fundamental to identify sustainable pathways, but then how do you structure those instruments to be credible and make sure that whatever transition plans are committed to, that they're adhered to over the life of the instrument. So those are just some of the trends. And then we have data showing us how this market is growing. Global green bond issuance is now almost $1.5 trillion globally, according to the Climate Bonds Initiative. In emerging markets, IFC and Amundi published a report this year on the 2020 results, and they noted 174 green bonds issued in emerging markets, amounting to $40 billion in issuance from 101 issuers. This is 14% of global issuance in 2020. 7 emerging markets issued green bonds for the first time in 2020, and IFC has estimated over $23 trillion in green and climate-related investment opportunities in emerging markets up to 2030 to achieve the Paris Agreement. So IFC looked at the nationally determined contributions of emerging markets, of key emerging markets. So this is almost a conservative estimate because it doesn't include all emerging markets, and it doesn't include all green sectors. It doesn't include climate smart agriculture, for instance. It includes things like green buildings, water management, waste management, electric vehicles, etc. So there's massive opportunity, and we've seen huge commitment to do more of these types of instruments responding to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we've seen more and more countries introducing taxonomies to help with the classification of what are eligible green assets. So bringing credibility to these definitions so that everyone involved, the issuers, the investors, can feel confident in these products. Because we all know if there's a lack of confidence in the products, then we won't see this market take off as well as it should be. And so for the results from our global report is that 6 countries have so far published detailed taxonomies. When we talk about detailed taxonomies, those are the taxonomies that provide thresholds and performance requirements. And Georgia obviously is part of the group that is developing taxonomies to bring them to market. And I'm thrilled that our first panelist is Salome Tzvalotse, head of Macro Financial Modeling and Analysis Division at National Bank of Georgia. She's also the representative for NBG to the Network for Greening the Financial System and to the Sustainable Banking and Finance Network. Salome continues to be a really fantastic contributor to SBFN's knowledge base, and her work on taxonomy development is amongst some of the very exciting case studies that we have in the network today. So I'd like to start with our first panelist. So Salome, I'd like to invite you to give us a sense of what NBG is doing on this opportunity side to create markets for green and socially focused finance. What do you think are the priorities and the key trends going forward? Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Luisa. So next slide, please. So as David already mentioned in his speech, one of the pillars in our roadmap is sustainable finance flows. And one of the actions listed under this pillar is introduction of sustainable finance taxonomy. The establishment of taxonomy is also interlinked with other steps outlined in the action plan and is an essential prerequisite for successful implementation of the roadmap. So today I want to present you the sustainable finance taxonomy for Georgia, which is our current project. Next slide, please. Yeah. So very briefly about motivation and objectives. So in order to align capital flows with sustainable development goals and climate change targets, it is very important to understand how sustainable is defined in the first place, as lack of common definition and classification system is named as one of the main challenges for sustainable finance development. Defining what types of investment qualify as sustainable allows market participants to better align their efforts and incentives and prevents greenwashing. Taxonomies that are aligned with international definitions facilitate cross-border investments. By aligning also with local requirements and integrating the country-specific characteristics, an effective taxonomy will help local institutions contribute to achieving Georgia's sustainability goals. So with that purpose, the NBG, in close collaboration with various local and international experts and stakeholders, is developing sustainable finance taxonomy for Georgia. Next slide, please. So the taxonomy was designed to take into account specifics of the Georgian financial system, development stage of sustainable finance in Georgia, and sustainability issues relevant to Georgia. Therefore, it has distinctive characteristics suitable for Georgia. Let me briefly describe a few of them. So first of all, our taxonomy incorporates both green and social taxonomies. The sustainable finance taxonomy adopts a broad perspective of in defining the sustainable finance that is employed by the MBG. As you already mentioned, like in countries like Georgia, when we talk about sustainable finance, we definitely include both green and social finance, because both achieving both environmental and social objectives is essential and important for us. Therefore, our taxonomy includes both green and social taxonomies. The green taxonomy provides a list of activities that aim to achieve environmental objectives and contribute to the development of green economy. While social taxonomy proposes is a list of categories focused on achieving social objectives for target population. And some examples of target population include people with disabilities, socially vulnerable families, migrants and displaced people, women, and so on. So here you can see the main categories under each taxonomy, and these categories are then divided into subcategories and categories with corresponding technical criteria where necessary, with additional explanations and examples. Next slide, please. So taxonomy draws from and is aligned with Georgia's sustainable development of priorities. Activities that are considered sustainable under this taxonomy contribute to Georgia's prioritized sustainability objectives, be it social or environmental. So as for the environmental objectives, it includes climate change mitigation and adaptation, pollution prevention and control, biodiversity conservation, among others. While poverty reduction, food security, education, healthcare, and financial inclusion fall under social objectives. Besides that, next slide. More like activities under each category contribute to achieving several SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And from this diagram, you can see that all the categories in the taxonomy helps to achieve several of the SDGs. In addition, taxonomy adopts and complies with international best practice. One of the main principles of the taxonomy is to ensure that it's consistent and aligned with international best practice and principles. And for this purpose, all widely accepted taxonomies have been reviewed. This ensures that the main categories used in the taxonomy are aligned with best international practice. And the colored dots on this diagram shows exactly that these categories are consistent with the internationally accepted taxonomies. The mapping was done with local practices as well, and this is written in blue in the diagram. The latter ensures that activities and classifications that are currently used locally by Georgian financial institutions are well integrated. Moreover, the taxonomy is customized for target users. The Sustainable Finance Taxonomy takes into account specifics of Georgian financial system, as I mentioned it before. So it is tailored to the needs of main local users, that are commercial banks and microfinance institutions. However, it is also applicable for other market players, such as bond issuers, investors, and other relevant actors, including certifiers and verifiers. And here you can see some possible applications of the taxonomy. So next slide summarizes all the main principles of the taxonomy, and I already mentioned most of them, but just to highlight the rest, few other principles. It was developed with various stakeholder engagement, and I will describe this in more details on the next slide. And also we wanted to make sure that it is relatively simple and practical to use in order to support market development. And apart from that, supporting financial institutions in the adoption and implementation process is also part of the taxonomy development process. And The last point is that it allows continuous review and development. Sustainable finance is a very fast developing field, and given technological advancement and market deepening, various sustainable finance products are constantly emerging. Moreover, sustainability issues and priorities may change. Thus, the taxonomy will be reviewed and updated periodically to reflect sustainable market development, both internationally and locally. And lastly, I want to talk about the development process itself of the taxonomy and describe the steps we have already taken, as well as tell you about our next steps regarding the development process. So the process started by reviewing of international practices, and we have reviewed all the taxonomies that are out there. Next was also to request information from commercial banks in order to review local practice. And after this review process was done, we drafted the first version of the taxonomy. And next, we started in-depth consultations with sectoral experts. And we had several meetings with various representatives of Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development of Georgia and the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Agriculture of Georgia. And many thanks them for their effort and contribution to the development process. So after these consultations, we defined main categories and subcategories of the taxonomy with the corresponding technical screening criteria. And then we also had consultations with international experts, because we faced some challenges, especially regarding energy efficiency in various sectors. So then, and that's why we have to include international experts as well. So after this, we have now currently have a draft version of the taxonomy, and soon we will start next phase of the development process. And I also want to tell you that last week we signed agreement. After a few months of work, we finalized and signed the agreement with PwC and Green for Growth Fund, GGF, technical assistance. So we will start another phase of the taxonomy development process. That is, we'll have consultations with financial institutions to receive their feedbacks and comments on the taxonomy, and then together with PwC experts, we will adjust the taxonomy based on the feedback we will receive from the financial institutions. And next phase will be the final round consultations with sectoral experts to share and to finalize the technical, mainly the technical screening criteria for each category, and then we will have a final review and we will publish the taxonomy. But this is not the end of the process. Another important step is adoption and adoption of the taxonomy. So for that, we will work together with PwC experts and GGF experts and financial institutions to develop screening and reporting tools in order to ensure effective adoption of the taxonomy. And then the last step will be trainings and capacity building events for financial sector representatives to ensure that these tools and the taxonomy is well understood and effectively applied in the practice. So this is our main steps for the coming weeks that we plan to do. So that's what I wanted to share for now. So I'll stop here and back to you, Luis.
Thank you so much, Salome. And I think your presentation reflects how much work goes into developing a taxonomy, and what our SBFN members are struggling with is how much to align with international developments, how much to reflect local priorities, local practices, and then how to match that with disclosure. And so I forgot to mention that Salome is the incoming co-chair of SBFN's working group on data and disclosure, which will kick off work soon. In parallel, we have a working group being launched on sustainable finance instruments to capture the various case studies on taxonomy. So we hope you will participate in that as well. But we're seeing a definite link. We're also seeing that taxonomies are things that evolve over time. And so it's very exciting to see your collaboration with PwC, because there's quite a bit of work in expanding and maintaining and growing taxonomies and making sure that they are fit for purpose. So I'm glad to move to our next speaker, who is Garth Bedford, Advisory Lead at the Financial Industry Group in IFC. And he has extensive background in banking and is part of IFC's work to support financial institutions to unlock these various opportunities. So Garth, can you talk a little bit about what IFC is doing to help move this market along? Because as we can see, many of the frameworks that are needed are only just developing and coming to market. So there's quite a lot of innovation, but also quite a lot of clarity and capacity building and awareness raising that's needed.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can see my screen.
We can, it's clear.
Fantastic. Yeah, so IFC, I mean, aside, of course, from what we're doing right here on supporting the development of the taxonomy and supporting the development of the roadmap for climate finance, we ourselves are keen to try and work with our partner financial institutions, work with the countries to try and expand really the amount of finance which is focused on climate related issues. And so in doing that, of course, and you mentioned a lot of the things that we are trying to innovate in areas like green bonds, blue bonds, trying to develop frameworks around climate risk, trying to really dig a bit deeper into what are the key areas that are really where the future is going to be for climate finance in individual countries, and understanding what are the big potential, what is the size of the prize, as it were, for financial institutions? What's in it for them? Why do they need to make the effort to go green rather than just maybe the easier route of traditional finance? So you can see I spent a lot of time on this particular slide. So you know, we identified looking at Georgia, and as I say, we've done this in most countries of the region to try and say, okay, where can IFC have an impact? What are the areas that are really contributing quite a lot to the problems in climate, and where can we support on developing an approach to financing improvements in these areas? So in Georgia, we really dug down to transport as a key issue and green buildings, and these are two areas where IFC has had a lot of experience working. And just quickly into transport, you know, this for us, this is mainly because the air pollution in Georgia is as high as pretty much anywhere else in the world, and the mortality rate is quite high. So we saw this as a leading contributor, which 24%, as we see, is of the total GHG emissions do come from the transport sector. So in trying to get this number down to something, you know, close to my home country of Canada, is going to take a lot of effort to try and get the old trucks, the old Kamaz trucks, the old cars off the road, and replace them with newer vehicles meeting Euro 6 standards, possibly EVs, but having sort of a carrot and a stick approach on both supporting on developing the regulatory framework around this, but also to try and develop ways for the financial sector to make sure that they do have appropriate financing in place to actually address these issues. So in Georgia, as we see, there's already some progress along this with the integration with the European transport sector, and to try and pass a lot of these new laws. But again, sometimes it comes down to enforcement. And the new taxonomy, which we just heard Salme discuss, it does support moving towards Euro 6, which means that a lot of these old truck fleets will have to be removed from the road and replaced with modern trucks, which is a huge part of the problem with emissions in the country. So in line with this, of course, we're working with several of our financial institutions and beyond even financial institutions, looking at other areas such as green leasing and other solutions which will make it economically viable to replace these fleets, to try and create a system where you can have a significant impact on the climate by, as I say, removing what we see is the cause of the problem. And of course, there's issues surrounding this. It's not just removing them and selling them on somewhere else, but removing them from the road completely and replacing with something which is more climate friendly. So this will require a significant investment, and this is where IFC, of course, is working. How can we get this investment to flow through? So, I mean, you can see in the areas of replacing the truck fleets in Georgia, we're looking at 650 million. On the light vehicles and minibuses, 750 million, and it goes on. And one of the areas of interest, of course, in places like Georgia is things like micromobility and looking at these more innovative areas. So we see there is a huge need. We see that IFC and other IFIs have a role to play in this, but how do we ensure not just bringing in the funding, but working, of course, with the sector to make sure that the correct products are in place, making sure that the financial institutions have a way to actually track this work and that they can actually see the impact of what they're doing, and making sure this is reflected in, as was discussed, climate risk. So if you're lending to a climate friendly truck, the risk there that it won't have to be replaced in 2 years is much less, and this should be reflected in the pricing of this product. So to try and bring all of this into the ecosystem, so that again, doing green lending is as attractive and easy as doing plain vanilla lending. And I'm going to go through quite quickly, but again, the second area is green buildings, where IFC has developed a lot of work around this to bring in things like certification, EDGE certification, to try and develop things like green mortgages, developing security for green securitization of green mortgages, which leads into the potential for green bonds. But again, we see around 15% of the emissions in Georgia comes from buildings and construction, and there's a lot of room for improvement in here. And it's a matter of tracking it and how we're actually ensuring that this is done on a consistent basis. So again, work is being done in Georgia on trying to bring in the regulatory framework around this. Again, the taxonomy actually is addressing this. And going forward, as the market is more and more deregulated, there's going to be a huge business case for actually doing this. So again, the opportunity is large. We see it's upwards of 650 million to bring in EDGE certified, and again, EDGE is our own certification, which allows us to quickly assess: is this green? Is this not? And there's also a big opportunity, knock-on opportunity in the secondary markets on this area. So as far as bringing through the financing, again, IFC sees we have a role to really leverage this. So very quickly, I mean, where is IFC working? I mean, right now we are working with a lot of our partners in the country on how to go green. And, we heard from Caroline earlier, this also includes the whole ESG piece, but also on the business line on how they can actually lend green and be able to assess this and do it in a efficient manner, using tools that we are developing for the region, such as CAFI, which allows you to quickly assess the impact of doing this type of lending, and as I mentioned, EDGE. And we continue to support on regulatory issues. As I say, on these areas when we're doing these studies, we can see clear regulatory hurdles to bringing in green transportation, to promoting green buildings. So on these areas, we are also in discussion with the government of Georgia on how to address this. And some of it, as I say, is enforcement of laws which are already on the books, and some are really trying to ensure that the regulations support green finance. So short and sweet, I hope, and happy to take any questions later.
Thanks so much, Garth. That does help us. We have a slightly shorter session, but it looks like we're still on track in terms of time. So I want to then move to our next speaker. And as Garth mentioned, if you do have questions, please feel free to put these in the chat in the meantime. Our panelists can potentially respond to some of the questions in the chat. And we will see if we have time for question and answer after the presentation. So our next speaker is Mr. Pavel Afanasyev, apologies for the pronunciation, who is the Director of the Securities Market Department at the Agency of the Republic of Kazakhstan on regulation and development of the financial market. So Pavel, I'm very pleased to invite you to give your presentation on how Kazakhstan is embracing these opportunities and putting in place enabling frameworks. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to take part in this event. I would like to thank the National Bank of Georgia, SBN, IFC for this initiative, because it's really important to share ideas and views regarding the global trends. As you already know, at the 26th UN Climate Change Summit that took part just recently in Glasgow, there was noted that the overall pace of action is insufficient right now worldwide, and mostly due to the fact that countries right now are forced to focus on more post-pandemic economic recovery, including the using of fossil fuels, for example. Nevertheless, we can see that the global trend is continuing. So what we think as the agency is that the financial institutions and the in general large institutional investors can actually act as the main driver of the economy's transition to the sustainable development. This actually requires the integration of ESG principles into the business models and investment decision-making process of the financial institutions and their clients. Talking about Kazakhstan, for the last few years, approximately 55 billion tenges, it's close to $130 million were raised through issuance of different green and social bonds on the local market. And we expect the trend to continue, but I would like to actually shift the focus from a theoretical vision of the role of financial market to more active transition to the principles of ESG and green financing. And here the main questions that we ask ourselves right now are the following. So the first one is the actual willingness of the market to transform its business processes and decision-making processes towards ESG, and more importantly, actually the willingness to pay for it, because we can see that only, for example, large institutions can be sustainable and can bear the cost of being sustainable. So that's the first point. The second is the complexity, the general complexity of the choice between the return on investment and ESG parameters, the climatic footprint, social responsibility. It all affects the general profitability, so we have to find a proper balance. The third thing that I'd like to mention is that the overall, there should be ability to search for the right investor and the right projects in our economic conditions. As you know, the Kazakhstan has a resource economy, and we are really right now trying to form and match the supply and demand for the sustainable funds on the market. And what we are planning to do next. So first of all, as in many countries, we are right now developing a recommendation paper that will include the recommendations regarding the implementation of ESG principles in the regulations in the financial market. Actually, recently there was a upper meeting. Just recently, our president met with the financial sector, where the task for the regulator was set to integrate ESG principles into the regulatory environment and regulatory framework. So now the general idea is recognized on the level of the president of the Republic of Kazakhstan. So, and what we are planning to do after the recommendation paper, we are planning to provide some regulation regarding the disclosure of information of the impact of ESG factors on activities of financial institutions and their clients. There will be some mix of the regulation, including some soft rules. And then we will move to the development of the requirements to include those factors within the risk management systems, within the corporate governance, and the overall information disclosure by the financial organizations. After that, we're planning to somehow monitor those risks and include them, integrate them into the supervision process of the regulator. So these are just some basic steps. They are forming right now, but as time passes, we have more and more details regarding the overall ability to move to ESG principles. So, and these steps that I mentioned is just for the Kazakhstan, actually, is the beginning of the global transition to sustainable development. We do realize the full potential of this. We see that there is economic and environmental and all other benefits that sustainable development can bring. So, and trying to do the things that are that will not harm the market, that will improve the market. And on the first step, there won't be some just tough rules and strict regulation. But at some point, we will move in the following years, probably regarding more strict regulation regarding ESG factors. So that's current picture of the sustainable market development in Kazakhstan. And I think in the following few months, we will have the recommendation paper. We will use probably the international standards as well to finish the paper, and we'll try to set the overall movement towards ESG and financial sector in Kazakhstan. Thank you. That's it for my part.
That's great. Thank you, Pavel. That was a very inspiring progress. I think what you described is very typical and important of in terms of that first initial stage that we see with SBFN members, which is where policies are being formulated, when the research is being done to see what is actually happening in the financial sector, and laying down the foundations for ESG risk management. IFC's own experience was this all started with ESG risk management, and then Garth can probably confirm that, you know, project by project, IFC started seeing that a risk could be turned into an opportunity, and that's where many of these products that IFC has actually started to come through as an offering. And we've also seen that working with companies to manage their performance on ESG has led to better performance in IFC's portfolio. So we have several studies where things like gender and good governance and other sustainability KPIs are actually linked with better performance of clients in our portfolio. So there is a very nice transition that it looks like you're beginning on that journey, and there's lots of opportunity ahead. So our last presentation, and we do have, Yasser, just to confirm, we do have 10 minutes for your presentation. I'm going to suggest that we won't do the Q&A because we don't have sufficient time for that. But we please, participants, please do put your questions in the chat. I've seen one question which was directed to Salome related to NBG collaborating with other agencies in Georgia on the development of the taxonomy. We do see that, and perhaps Salome can respond in the chat, but we do see that collaboration is emerging very naturally. Lilith, I think you have your microphone on. You kindly put yourself on mute.
Louise, you are muted. Sorry.
Louise, you are muted.
Sorry, am I back?
Yeah, yes.
So what we have seen is that collaboration is a major trend in our global progress report. It's something that has emerged in the last 2 years, that agencies in emerging markets are reaching out to each other to collaborate on developing national ecosystems for sustainable finance. And Morocco is a fantastic example. Our next speaker is Yasser Munsif, who is the head of corporate finance and financial disclosure at the Moroccan Capital Market Authority, AMMC. And they have been on a journey of 5 years or more, particularly focused on the opportunity side, so developing guidelines for green and social bonds and also gender bonds recently. But Yasser also heads up their work on financial disclosure and ESG disclosure, which we talked about earlier, which is so fundamental in the market to enabling this. But AMMC has played a very important role in the collaboration between agencies in Morocco on the Moroccan National Roadmap, and AMMC were the co-chair for the measurement working group for SBFN, which helped update our measurement framework for this year's global report. And one of the key things that they emphasized was the role of capital markets and capital markets authorities, and we heard from Ukraine earlier, in this ecosystem. So yes, sir, I'm going to hand over to you there. I think there's many points you can touch on, and we look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much, Louise. Let me just share my screen.
Yeah, we can see it. Great.
So first of all, I would like to thank SBFN, National Bank of Georgia, and IFC for this event and wonderful opportunity to exchange our respective experiences. And I would like also to congratulate the National Bank of Georgia on the significant progress they have made on their sustainable finance journey. So without further ado, let me walk you through the main components of the Moroccan experience in that field. First of all, I would like to highlight that our journey in terms of sustainable finance was for sure favored by an international contest where we saw significant growth in these market segments globally, but also with the favorable national context. So briefly, the kingdom's constitutions erect sustainable development as a mission, as a direct mission of the state. It is also declined in various operational policies. For example, we have a very ambitious renewable energy strategy targeting 52% of the energy mix from renewable sources by 2030. And in this year, the kingdom adopted a new development model that clearly recognizes sustainable development as a national priority and objective, and recognizes also the role of capital markets in fueling the economic growth. So in concrete terms, our journey in terms of sustainable finance really started at the COP22 in 2016, which was organized in Morocco, in Marrakesh. So, the financial sector actors, be it the Capital Markets Authority, the central bank, stock exchange, insurance regulator, and others came together and drafted two roadmaps. The first one was to align the Moroccan financial sector with sustainable development. And the second one had a regional dimension and aimed at favoring or fostering the emergence of sustainable finance in Africa. And we will see what we did in that field. The second major initiative that we had during the COP22 was that AMMC launched the Marrakesh Pledge, which is the first continental initiative in that field. And it's a call for African regulators and the exchanges to work individually and collectively to foster green capital markets in Africa with a certain number of commitments. So today, the Marrakesh Pledge gathers 26 signatories, and you see the maps of the regulators and exchanges that are members. To fulfill the engagement we took in the framework of the roadmaps as well as the Marrakesh Pledge, AMMC has undertaken a series of actions. It was a progressive approach. Right after the COP22, we published the first green bonds guideline with support of IFC, which aimed at setting ground rules and an operational framework according to which green bonds could be issued in Morocco. So we felt that some market actors were interested in the hype of green bonds at the time. So it made sense to lay the ground rules to issue the first green bonds. 1 year later, we introduced guidelines on corporate social responsibility and ESG reporting, with the aim of educating the public on these subjects and at the same time incentivizing issuers to tackle sustainable development matters and prepare them for their upcoming obligations. So in 2018, we published new guidelines on green and social bonds. So we introduced social bonds and at the same time updated the guidelines on green bonds to account for the evolution of the international standards. And in 2019, there was a major change when we introduced mandatory rules in the regulatory framework of AMMC. So from this date, we have mandatory provisions with regards to the prospectus requirements for the issuance of sustainable finance instruments, as well as mandatory ESG reporting applicable for all the issuers on the market. So the first reports we had were for the
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so is it Yasser's screen that has frozen?
Looks
I
like
think so. Let's
connection
hang on a
down
minute.
now.
I think if we can wait a minute. All right, it looks like he's reconnecting. Right, Boris, I think he is trying to reconnect, but I'm conscious of time. We have around 10 minutes left for the wrap up from the two final speakers. So I think if Yasser is not able to reconnect, we can perhaps close the panel there. And I think perhaps I can also encourage participants. We have had several presentations by Morocco on their journey, which are available on the SBFN website. And Yasser has already touched on many of the key elements that they've developed, the green bond guidelines, the sustainability bond guidelines, in tandem with disclosure requirements. They've collaborated extensively with other agencies within Morocco, and they continue to work on building capacity and raising awareness for local issuers. So I'm sad that you will not see the rest of Yasser's presentation, but he's confirmed that he's lost connection. And I think perhaps we'll take that as a signal that we can move to the closing remarks. And Boris, first I want to thank the panelists. Thank you very much for your detailed input. What I love about the NBG conferences is it's always rich and diverse and very practical. So thank you for contributing to that. And thank you again to NBG for the opportunity to co-host. A hand to you, Boris.
I think Yasser has joined us just a second ago. Oops, I was muted. Yeah, I was muted, apologies. I think Yasser joined us a second ago, if I'm not wrong.
Boris, can you guide us on how you would like to deal with timing?
I think since we are...
Really sorry, I lost my connection.
No worries. Yes, thank you so much for reconnecting. Maybe you can wrap up a few key messages, and then we move to, we'll wrap up the session and we'll have closing remarks. Thank you so much for joining us. For joining.
Welcome. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'll try to go very quickly. Well, we adopted in all these initiatives a proactive and flexible approach by relying on guidelines before transforming them into mandatory provisions and rules after testing, etc. We had the objective of reaching a good balance between international standards and local realities, and we looked for a consensus of all the stakeholders to make sure that the frameworks were practicable and usable by all of them, and an integrated and progressive approach because we tackled at the same time sustainable finance instruments and ESG reporting. Well, just a quick word on the last initiative or last guidelines we published with regards to gender bonds. As you know, gender bonds are a subcategory of social bonds. So developing guidelines on this may seem trivial, but the gender inequality issue is an underlying issue for all the SDGs, and there are inequalities across all dimensions of the SDGs. And reaching gender equality is paramount to achieve all the SDGs as per the extensive research we had. It was also an occasion to introduce new standards that we didn't introduce before, which are the sustainability-linked bond principles. And it was an opportunity to show how general guidelines or standards can be can be used in an innovative way to structure issuances. With regards to market reactions, we have up to now five issuance aggregating more than $420 million. And a major bank recently announced its intention to issue a gender bond before the end of the year. So although the sample is somehow small, it has a good variety in terms of innovation and specific aspects. And it is worth noting also that all these issuances confirm market appetite for this type of instruments. We could see that with the oversubscriptions we have, and with the greenium we saw on the last issuance, where the sustainable tranche was issued at a lower interest rate than the plain vanilla one. Maybe a word on sustainable development that has become an overarching theme in all the regulatory actions. So we introduced a lot of other regulatory reforms that are aligned with sustainable development objectives, like alternative market for financing SMEs, crowdfunding for financing very small enterprises, reinforcement of governance rules for issuers, and mandatory rules for men-women parity in the issuers board of directors, etc. An important evolution is also that in this year, the central bank issued a directive to call banks to take into account ESG factors in their loans. The next step of AMMC action will mainly target the demand side, putting in place a framework to foster the integration of ESG factor in the investment industry, because now we can say that the framework that was developed for issuers is fairly comprehensive. For sure, there is still a lot of work to do, particularly in capacity building, but the next target will be the demand side, the investment side. And we will also continue accompanying the ecosystem through capacity building events for different market participants and expanding the reference framework. We are also working on a taxonomy project, as it was highlighted by all the presentations. Taxonomy has become a very important subject for the development of sustainable finance. And of course, we continue dialogue and cooperation with other local regulators and policymakers, and of course, in the framework of networks such as the SBFN, which was very beneficial in all this journey. I thank you for your attention. For the sake of time, I will skip the next slides and maybe share them with you later. Thank you.
Yes, sir. So thank you so much. And I'm very glad you were able to reconnect, because there were some key points that you shared in those slides. So thank you very much. And thank you to the panelists, and thank you to NBG. And I'm going to hand back to Mariam to guide us to the closing of the event.
Thank you, Lois. Our event is gradually coming to an end. I would like to ask the Deputy Governor of the National Bank of Georgia, Mr. Babuna Lejava, for some closing remarks and maybe a summary of next steps. Mr. Babuna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mariam. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by thanking all the participants who made today's event such a success, especially the panelists for leading very interesting sessions. This event has become a platform for sharing knowledge and experience, and it gives a rise to new ideas that eventually translate into actions that support the development of sustainable finance framework in different countries. This progress has been well documented in the Global Progress Report by SBFN. A new report gave us very interesting insights into the efforts that 43 emerging economies have taken to develop national level sustainable finance policies and prepare the financial sector for transitioning towards more sustainable behavior. The report detailed the actions of regulators and the industry associations that work on various issues such as addressing climate change, disclosing ESG-related information, providing market with common taxonomy, integrating ESG risks in decision-making, and so on. As we have heard today, this report is a great opportunity to learn from the experiences of peer countries and be inspired to take new steps towards sustainable finance. There's a growing understanding about the importance of integrating ESG considerations into the decision-making process of the financial institutions. As we've heard today, there are two main channels through which this process takes place. One is through disclosing ESG-related information, and second is through assessing the ESG risks. To support this process, more and more regulators integrate ESG disclosure requirements and ESG risk assessment requirements into the corporate governance codes, like we did at NBG. Those requirements then are followed by a set of corresponding guidelines. First, ESG reporting and disclosure principles ensure consistent and comparable disclosure of ESG information. And second, ESG risk assessment guidelines ensure proper integration of ESG risks into the risk assessment of financial institutions. It is good to see those advances around the world, and we at NBG are also trying to keep up with these changes and introduce best international practices in Georgian financial sector as well. In recent years, we have seen significant increase in new financial products and investment activities that target environmental and social sustainability outcomes. Emerging economies have also become much more active in that regard. And in the past couple of years, we've seen a number of emerging economies issuing green bonds for the first time. And given the sustainable finance tendencies, this number is bound to grow. As financial markets shift towards more sustainable behavior, the challenges along the way become more prominent. As we have seen during today's discussion, having well-defined taxonomy is one of those challenges. Ensuring correct labeling of green and social products is the essential precondition for developing sustainable finance. While doing so is very important to keep taxonomy easy to use and tailored to the features of the economy. As it was mentioned a few times throughout today's event, the NBG is committed to making continuous efforts to develop sustainable finance framework and support the financial sector in smooth transition towards a more sustainable model. Sustainable finance is a rapidly growing, relatively new field, and to stay up to date and keep up with the dynamics, events such as today's has a huge role to play. I hope you enjoyed today's forum, learn new interesting facts, and gain better insights into sustainable finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Rong, would you like to share with us some final comments and concluding remarks, maybe?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll be very short. And thank you very much, Deputy Governor Lazeva. You covered all the important points. And also join you, thank you everyone for a great discussion today. And I hope you all have enjoyed this lively conversation as I have. It's further evidence of the partnership and commitment of this community. I almost feel the energy of the SBN members like in the room. While countries, you can see from the experience, differ in different national contexts and priorities, but the common objective remains to align financial markets with sustainable development goals and climate change targets. There are many things that struck me during the conversation, and the DG already covered, and I would like to just highlight three things. One is you share specific insights from your experience to improve ESG and climate risk management and increasing sustainability-linked finance. And you helped identify what is needed at the global level to scale and embed sustainable finance practice from all parts of financial sector. And you also, I heard very clearly, you prioritize the areas and the focus for SBFN to help members tackle some common challenges. So while all this significant progress has been made, our conversation today also highlight some remain, that much remains to be done, namely the taxonomy, the data, the measurement, disclosure, and also capacity building. So Thank you very much for your commitment and efforts. And IFC is very proud to be the Secretariat for SBFN. We're focusing on 3 key roles. 1, we convene public-private partnership with a focus in emerging market. And 2nd, we facilitate access to IFC global and the regional technical assistance programs you heard from my colleagues in the region. And 3, and we will bring together a wide range of actors of the financial sector and all aspects of sustainable finance as reflected in the SBFN measurement framework from risk to opportunity. Collectively, we are driving a systematic shift in how business is done in the financial sector. So thanks again for our partners, particular NBG, our speakers and SBFN members, and all the participants from all over the world. And we look forward to continue supporting your sustainable finance journey going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank again all the panelists, moderators, speakers, and participants for very interesting presentations, discussions, questions, and comments. We hope to see all of you here in Tbilisi next year, attending our next Sustainable Finance Forum. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, colleagues, for joining.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.